Hello, everybody, and welcome. My name's Adam Perlis, and I'm the CEO and founder of Academy, a product design studio. And today, we're going to be talking about how ego affects good decision-making when it comes to design. Now, can you guys remember a time at work where you had to admit being wrong? Pretty difficult, right? The problem is that we're constantly conditioned by society, our culture, and even our educational system to crave this feeling of wanting to be right. And largely, we can blame our egos for this. Now, to give you guys a bit of context, as a young designer, that's me, as a young designer, full of confidence and bravado, I had a huge ego. I was averse to criticism. I'd say things like, what do they know about design? They're not designers. But this was really my ego and own subconscious defending itself from what it thought was right. But what it was really doing was exposing my own insecurities. And when my boss would say, make it blue, I'd say, make it red. But really, who was right? We didn't know. So the problem was ego. And so what I want to do is take you on a journey into the depths of ego, psychology, even our minds, and the metaphysical reasons why we make the decisions that we do. And we're going to end with some effective strategies on how to combat it. So ego, it's not always a bad thing, right? Its job is to make sure we feel safe and secure. It looks after our physical and emotional and social well-being. But when these needs are not met, it can lead to irrational decisions. And I started to think about my approach. It was really the least productive approach, advocacy. And I think this definition does a great job of explaining it. I'm going to read it to you. We argue our positions with a passion that prevents us from weighing opposing views. We downplay our position's weaknesses to boost our chances of winning. And we march into decision-making discussions armed for a battle of wills. The consequences? Fractious exchanges that discourage innovative thinking and stifle diverse and valuable viewpoints. So as I think back to my boss and the way that we were arguing, discussing things, it really wasn't very productive, right? We were always at each other's throats and trying to win this battle of wills. So an older and wiser Adam Perlis realized that he lacked empathy. So I started to ask myself, how can we transcend our egos and challenge our need to be right in order to practice more effective decision-making? Well, I did a little research, and what I found was fascinating. I started to go into the depths of psychology. I learned about Daniel Kahneman, who wrote a book called Thinking Fast and Slow, and even won a Nobel Prize in economics about this subject, about how we make the decisions that we do. And he talked about two systems of thought. System one is your fast gut reaction to the way you make a decision. System two is your analytical, critical way of thinking and making decisions. Now, as we look back to the example of red or blue, this was my boss and I using our system one to be able to make a decision with a quick gut reaction of which one was our favorite color. But really, had we taken a step back and thought about the merits of red and blue and what was right for our user, and maybe even tested the two different approaches, we might have had a much more rational discussion, and we would have come up with a better decision together. And the problem is that when it comes to product design, especially in the digital space, your gut has shit for brains. Literally, we use less brain power when we use System 1, our gut, although it does make up about 97% of our decisions in our normal lives. That makes sense because it's completely instinctual. But when it comes to product design, we might not want to do that. But the issue is that important people don't really want their gut feelings pinned down, and people prefer their own internal probability counter, their gut, which becomes problematic because that means we're always going to choose blue because our boss said so, and that may not be the right decision for our users. So I want to take you through black and white thinking and how this is detrimental to the way that we make decisions. So first I want to talk about the probability of being right. I thought to myself, well, what was the probability that I was right? There was it was hard to tell. It wasn't quantifiable. So I started to look back at our education, right? We would have these multiple choice questions, and we'd have really a 25% chance of answering the question right. But how would we know if we knew the answer or we were just guessing? We wouldn't. The problem is that real-world problems don't have multiple choice answers. And this conditioned pattern of thinking leads us unprepared to try to tackle the larger, more complex problems that the world and user experiences have to offer. We may be planning for several different user segments and different problems and may have several correct answers, and that needs to be okay, because uncertainty can be scary and challenging, but by reframing as a space for innovation, we can really develop a sense of agency to act efficiently and be empowered to challenge our own assumptions. And when it comes to transcending our egos and embracing uncertainty, sometimes we have to be okay that things aren't so black and white, and that we have to have a little bit of gray in between. So how do we embrace uncertainty and transcend our egos? Well, first, we need to look back at our educational system. And truthfully, the system is rigged. How many of us can remember being in a classroom and being afraid to raise our hands and answer a question for the fear of embarrassment that we might not know the answer? We might need to change the way the system is built. I think this quote really captures it. Our educational system, it's rooted in the construct of right and wrong. And as students, we learn to avoid best we can the embarrassment of being wrong. And getting the right answer becomes the primary purpose of our education. And our brains, they're also part of the problem. I mean, classical conditioning can help explain how we begin to associate being right as signaling an upcoming reward and even releasing feel-good neurotransmitters such as dopamine. So our brains are part of the problem also. So one of the effective ways that I've learned how to combat this problem is this idea of psychological safety. And I've been practicing it without my knowing it for quite a long time. But as I started to dig deeper and learn more about it, what I found was exactly the approach that I thought could help tackle this problem. I'm going to read you the definition here. It's a shared belief held by members of a team that the team is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. It's a sense of confidence that the team will not embarrass, reject, or punish someone for speaking up. It describes a team climate characterized by interpersonal trust and mutual respect in which people are comfortable being themselves. And I'm not the only one who thinks this is a good idea. According to a study done by Google of over 51,000 employees regarding the success of teams, according to them, psychological safety was the #1 reason for a team's success. Above skill set, expertise, skill level, team dynamics, psychological safety was #1. So what does our ego do to us? Well, first, it hinders our ability to embrace uncertainty. That's because decisions are untested and irrational. It hinders our ability to empathize because decisions are made in a vacuum. It encourages black and white thinking, when in reality, things are a little bit gray. And it makes us afraid to express ideas, which really limits our innovation potential. So now, I want to talk to you a little bit about design thinking. Samantha mentioned this before. Now, design thinking, of course, is nothing new. It's been around for a very long time. But fundamentally, design thinking is a holistic approach to problem solving. It's the belief that our users are at the center of our universe, that data-driven decisions are better than intuitive ones, and that inclusiveness is the key to a democracy. And why that's important and how this can help with the problem of ego in the workplace is that in design thinking, we embrace uncertainty by allowing work to be tested early and often. We empathize by seeing things from the user's perspective first and the business's second. And we include a variety of disciplines and viewpoints in the early creation process so that we can get a diversity of different ideas. Now, 2 years ago, I spoke at 15 Second Festival about this very topic, design sprints. And now I've been practicing it for over 2.5 years in my own company, Academy. And it's not just us that thinks that this is a great idea anymore. This list of companies are just to name a few of the big companies that are using design sprints to effectively practice design thinking in the workplace. Now, just as a little refresher, design sprints are a 6-step methodology to solve and test user experience problems in a really efficient manner. To break down the steps, this is what the design sprint essentially looks like. We start with research and understanding. This is that empathy piece, talking to our users first, talking to internal and external stakeholders. We then sketch and decide, which is largely a democratic process. This brings that diversity of ideas and also that safe space so that everybody has that interpersonal trust. We also are going to design and prototype solutions that we are going to test and validate. And that is that part of embracing uncertainty that I talked about. Because we don't know all the answers. And we're going to test them out and learn from our failures and build amazing products because of it. Your team looks a little bit like this. You start with a decider. This is your boss, someone who's going to make decisions at the end of the day. A facilitator will facilitate discussion and be your sprint captain. You're going to have a design expert, a tech expert, a product expert in the room, and then 2 field experts who are going to lend you some credibility into whatever problem is that you're trying to solve. So this could be a marketing person, a salesperson, a support person. So why are we doing design sprints? Well, first of all, we want to get buy-in. Buy-in from our internal stakeholders, our external stakeholders, and our users early in the process so that everybody feels like their voice is being heard. It's a democratic process, and it gets hard evidence before committing any money to anything, which means that we're going to create solutions faster and cheaper than we ever have before. The process looks like this. We start with a design sprint, which is largely a concept phase. We just want to test a few ideas, get some baseline information. And once we take that and we move that into a more detailed design sprint, we're going to get into the more nitty-gritty. We're going to test again. And then we move it into an agile process where we'll be building and testing and iteratively testing in quarterly cycles, as we like to call it. Now, I want to tell you a little story about transformation that I helped lead at Time Magazine. Now, when I got there, they had no idea what design thinking was. They didn't have any UX people. They asked what was Sketch. I had to teach them that too. What was prototyping? And then, of course, when I asked about the research department, they said, research who? This was obviously a problem, so we had a lot of work to do. But we started small. We started with the photo galleries. We were going to redesign the photo galleries for Time.com. And we invited a bevy of people into the room. We invited the head of photography, the photo editors, the product team, the design team, the tech team. And we all got together. And what we found was really interesting. We got a whole slew of ideas. I mean, you can see the pictures on this board. Our entire room was filled with these things. And what was amazing was not all the ideas we generated, because there were a lot and they were great and we came up with some good solutions, but what was great was the reaction we got from everybody. Everyone felt like they owned the problem, so they owned the solution. And because they did that, we all felt a kinship together. And coming out of it, the results were actually pretty good, but of course we had some failures and we learned from them. We were able to iterate fast. But as I said before, the best part about it was that cohesion, that collaboration. And the head of photography came up to me afterwards and said, that was the best process I've ever been a part of. Keep doing it. We were onto something. And the head of design for all of Time Inc. asked me to come speak in front of all the teams at Time and talk about our process. And then they started asking us to help run the process for them. That led me to talks at South by Southwest, Web Summit, and 15 Second Festival. And here I am again on this stage talking about this very subject. Now, the benefits of design thinking are as such. We encourage us to embrace uncertainty. It forces us to empathize with users. It makes us unafraid to express ideas, as it provides that psychological safe space, and takes our ego out, and it puts empathy back in. And the payoff is that you're going to get happier people, like we talked about before, more efficient product teams, better products, which equal happier customers. And if there's one thing that I can have you walk away with today as you start to move into an egoless culture in your organizations, is that you have to be comfortable with a little bit of gray. I want to thank you guys so much for having me today. I'll now take some questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam.
You're welcome.
So we are going to open up for questions. We do have some microphones that are running up and down the stage, as well as we have the feedback app. So if you want to put any questions in there, feel free to do so. So you mentioned towards the end, happier people. So how do you make yourself happier? And how do you make your people happier?
You know, I think it's just taking that same sort of mindset, never being too set on one singular idea, being open-minded about the ideas, and letting your people do a lot of the work for you. I think just putting that trust in others allows you to think more clearly, give a lot more mutual respect to the people working with you, and as a result, you collaborate better and come up with better products. And this results in happier people, I think.
Yeah. When we were talking, we had a chance to talk about some situations that you've had where, let's say, egos played a role in the leadership that you've been dealing with. What have you learned from that, and how has that influenced the way that you manage your team now?
So, I'm sorry, can you repeat the first part of the question? I couldn't hear
it. When we were talking, you originally had talked about ego and how that had impacted you in terms of some of the leaders that you've worked for.
Yes.
So in those scenarios, what have you learned from it, and how do you apply it to the teams that you're working with now?
Yeah, I mean, of course, I think we've all been there, right? We've all had a boss or superior, or even a peer that has had, quite a large ego, and of course, that's always hard to combat. But I think, by, again, sort of putting your people first, allowing yourself to not get too attached to a particular idea, using some of the techniques that I talked about in the talk, which is, being okay with, open to testing everything, right? If you don't know the answer, that's okay. Let's test it out, and let's see what works, and not being hurt by that result. Yeah. And I think what's great about data is that it's super hard and concrete, and so if we know something's not working, then we're kind of okay with the failure, right? We're like, yeah, maybe we didn't get it right this time.
Completely. So we've got a few questions that are coming in. The first one's, I'm a design student, and I often have the problem that if I admit that I'm uncertain and imperfect, they feel like they can demand my work and my time and pay me basically nothing. How do I deal with this? Great question, because I think we all have those situations sometimes.
Yeah, so I think that, again, like as I just mentioned, right, imperfection is totally fine, and of course, like design sometimes is mistaken for what other people call art. I think that of course they sort of coexist and are important for each other, but when it comes to designing a solution to something, right, it is imperfect, and that's totally fine. So if your teachers are demanding that something be perfect, what I would challenge them with is, well, why don't we test the solution? And if my solution's wrong, then of course, let's go with your solution. And we try that and we'll test it. And if it doesn't work, then we're going to come up with another solution. But I don't think any teacher should be striving for absolute perfection. It's unfair until it's been tested.
So you talked about taking risks, failure, trying things out. So after one of your first sprints, what are some things that you learned and that you tweaked going forward?
Yeah, oh wow. Going back to my first ever sprint, it was back when I was working at AT&T, and I'll never forget it. I invited about 20 people to the room. Huge mistake. Don't invite too many people to the room. Invite the right people to the room, and make sure you clear it with the powers that be, so that you have a representative from each group, but you just don't need everybody. That was mistake number one. I think that also the process took a lot longer than I anticipated. As I tried to emulate the Google Sprint book, which was a 5-day process at the time. It ended up taking about 2 weeks in a more corporate environment. So what I'd say is that design sprints are not a one-size-fits-all. You need to find the right fit for your organization. And now in the agency environment or consulting environment, we've reduced it for 5 days, but that's because we can really control the process and get people to agree to the way that we like to work, because they know that it's effective.
So you're talking there about how do you bring in the right people, but you've worked with some really big organizations.
Yeah.
And when you're working with big organizations, it's really challenging to get them on board sometimes.
Yes.
So how do you get those organizations on board with design thinking?
Yeah, I mean, it's my biggest challenge, 100%. One of the things that I will say is that an organization that is not committed to change, not open to change, cannot be changed, right? So we,
Gotcha.
frankly, we have trouble working with an organization like that. But an organization that from the top down can be open to change, then we can work with them. And then from the earliest stages, we are selling them in on why there are benefits to design thinking. Okay. And then as we start to work with them, we show them the benefits by doing workshops, by doing design sprints, by taking them literally side by side with us, collaborating as if we're embedded inside their team.
It's awesome.
And show them the way and show them the value. And I can't tell you how many times a CEO has come up to me and just been like totally wide-eyed and like, I can't believe the answers that we got to this. I'm shocked. We were totally wrong. And like now we have an eye-opening experience of like what our solutions should be. And how could we ever have done things a different way?
Incredible.
So yeah, the quotes have been amazing from some amazing CEOs that really, they thought they knew all the answers and they didn't, and that's okay. And seeing them open up and be vulnerable and embracing the uncertainty, that's a magic moment.
Just shows that when you try something new, sometimes it opens you up to another perspective.
Absolutely.
So then on the opposite side of that, when you're working with small teams or even yourself, how do you apply the design thinking process?
Yeah, so the way we do it is always starting with research and discovery, as we talked about in the previous slide, talking about the design sprint process. We then sort of map out a product roadmap and a strategy, really aligning with the problem framing that we've looked at, so you're trying to see what are the major issues that we want to tackle first. We then set up different sprints for different things if necessary, if there's like a lot of problems to solve. And then once we've gone through each sprint, we then decide to either move that into more detailed design or maybe even go back to the drawing board if we've sort of missed the mark. Once all of that's complete, we're going to eventually move that over into agile development. We'll be collaborating side by side with the developers, helping communicate the design vision, using tools like Zeppelin or Envision to help that, smooth the transition and see it all the way through launch and hopefully testing again once we've launched.
So there's a question from the audience that I have to say really resonates with me.
Sure.
And it's around how can we recognize or draw the line between when it's our opinion and we're standing up for our opinion versus when we're letting our ego take over?
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely something that I even continue to this day to struggle with, right? Like we have to be able to voice our opinions. Right, but I think the thing that makes it distinct is one, doing it with respect, and then the other is doing it in a sense that you're open to changing your opinion if new information is surfaced, right? Yeah. So don't come into this, so passionately that you should argue with conviction, but so passionately that you're blinded to the other outside ideas that could be invited here. So. I strongly recommend that you just sort of try to take a very even-keeled approach, fight for your ideas with conviction, but be open to change.
Not easy to do,
no.
Especially when you're super passionate about something.
And it takes a lot of experience to get there.
Completely. Any tips on how you can practice that?
I think pretty much covered it in most of the presentation, but like I said, it's sort of always trying to take that approach, and trying to self-check. I think that's one of the best things to do is look introspectively, think about yourself and how others might be seeing you in that particular moment. And even if you get it wrong in that moment, and maybe you overreact or do something that may offend somebody, try to go back and talk to that person one-on-one and let them know that it was your bad. And I think that right there just shows your ability to really solve problems collaboratively.
Completely.
And people really respect that.
Completely. So I think we might have time for one more question. Are there any other questions from the audience? As the lights come up.
We've got
questions in the front. Excellent. Thank you.
There's
we
a
can get a
microphone
microphone just down here.
Before you just said that the education system is rugged, in which kind of way would you see that the system should change?
I'm sorry, it's a little hard to hear you. Can you say it louder?
Yes.
Put the mic closer.
You just said before that our education system is rugged. What would be some words how you would describe the system to be changed in the future?
Did you say envision systems?
The education
Oh,
system,
education
yes.
system. I apologize. Yeah, so I think one thing is starting to invite the idea of being okay with failure, right? Like everything in our education system is always set up for like, okay, well this is a pass-fail kind of situation, right? You have to get 100 on the test, right? Like, but is 100 on the test really a good measure of somebody's ability, right? Should we look at other factors, like, for example, how did they approach solving the problem, right? I mean, in things that are more concrete, like mathematics, maybe there's a reason for perfection, right? But even in mathematics, like, the way that you start to attack a problem can be wildly different, So I think that as long as we can start as teachers and educators to start maybe thinking about introducing this idea of testing and failing and testing and failing and learning from those mistakes, I think there's a lot of value that can be had from that. So that's how I'd probably position it at first. But yeah, I'm open to discussions about more about that because it's a fascinating topic for me. And I'll also say anecdotally from my own experience is that I wasn't always the best test taker. Right? I, in fact, didn't have great grades when I was growing up. And it wasn't until college that I became a really good student. Luckily, I've had a lot of success in my career. And I don't think that if you looked at my test scores from grade school, you would be able to measure whether I was a great student or be successful in my career. Right? So are we doing things the right way? Are we measuring things the best way? I don't know. I think maybe there's an opportunity to look into some different answers to that question.
Maybe we need to supply some design thinking.
Maybe.
But as you mentioned, there's lots of time to talk about this. So if you want to grab Adam afterwards, he'll definitely be around. And also don't forget to download the FS Match app because it's a great way to make connections as well.
One thing, if you guys wouldn't mind flashing the last screen on my slide deck, I have my contact information on there. If anybody wants to get in touch with me, please do. It's adam.perlis@academyux.com or at Adam Perlis on Twitter. Please LinkedIn me if you'd like. And if you have any questions, I'll be on the side of the stage, happy to answer them for you.